Good morning, good evening, wherever you're coming from. Welcome to the Zach Fast podcast. This is episode number 4 and the first episode where we are bringing on a guest. This is not going to be a guest-heavy podcast. I promise you. It's not because of me. It's largely part because of me. I'm not very organized, and I'd much rather have this opportunity to just talk to the camera. But Freddy, if you don't know Freddy, this is Freddy Smith. Freddy and I make pretty similar content, or how can I frame this? At least at its core, we're talking about the same issues. And today I want us to dedicate time to talk about the affordability crisis, to talk about the growing wealth gap that's happening right in front of us, and ultimately assign blame. Who's causing all of this? And what is this? What is the actual problem? What is the person or thing that we can blame? And maybe how do we actually bring a solution to the table? Well, wherever I'd like to start, Freddie, is for anybody who's seen you online, they kind of know your gist. They see the art behind you, the white wall behind you that they're probably very familiar with. And the concept that you attack is the generational difference in living and homeownership, the cost of living and shelter. It seems to be the core of what you attack. Just so people know, you are a real estate agent. You were a former actor. I want to dig into that for a second. And now, instead of doing the typical real estate thing, which let me define what that is, going after clients and commission via your brand recognition, that's pretty much the playbook for most real estate agents. You're choosing to seemingly push that to the side and forego a proper click funnel to instead spread a message about what's going on in your industry. And that's my first question I want to ask you is, what drug you into real estate in the first place? And then what kind of shifted, because you didn't always make content like this, what kind of shifted you into where you're at today?
Well, if you want the kind of mid to long story, I can break it all down for you.
Yes.
How my social media kind of started. So yeah, like you mentioned, I was an actor for 15 years. So right after high school, I moved from Ohio out to Los Angeles in 2006. And it was a different landscape then. And the auditions were crazy. I went on hundreds of auditions, and it took me about 4 years before I started booking commercials. And then I basically had 2 big breaks. I worked on the remake of 90210. I don't know if you remember that
I didn't
show
know
on
that
the
at all.
CW. Yeah, so I did that. Only 5 episodes, nothing crazy, but it was prime time and super cool. And I got a taste of what it was like to have a publicist and have, red carpets. And it was like my first real taste into Hollywood. I was like, this is awesome. And then right on the heels of that, I auditioned for the show Days of Our Lives, the long-running soap opera, and ended up booking that show 3 weeks after 90210, and ended up doing a nearly 10-year run on that soap opera. So I had a couple little breaks in between, but from basically 2011 to 2020, up until the pandemic, I worked on Days of Our Lives. And then between, I wrote and directed some of my own stuff, did some commercials and things like that. But though I was loving my career, I was starting to make money. I was getting a taste of being self-employed, understanding how S-corps worked and things like that. And I started really getting into understanding money. But I also saw a lot of my friends who were way more successful than I was. And they were making a lot of money, but then they wouldn't work for 3 years. And then they'd be back on their friend's couch and be broke. And I go, well, I don't want to do that. What can I do on the side? So I started getting into online sales and marketing, and I just fell in love with it. So I started just selling affiliate marketing or affiliate products and things like that through social media. So in 2014, I really saw that social media wasn't just to connect with my fans, but you could actually build a brand and a business on social media. So in 2014 is when I really started my social media journey. So I started posting almost every single day, started a podcast, did stories, Instagram stories when they finally rolled out. So I've been building content for 11 years. A lot of it was about acting. A lot of it was about my lifestyle, me and my wife's relationship. Like, I talked about everything. Well, when 2020 came, they ended up letting me go from the show after 9 or 10 years. 3 weeks later, the pandemic hit. And we're stuck in this apartment. And I was like, let's just dip. I kind of feel like we did this Hollywood thing. Let's move to Florida. My wife and I moved to Florida. We kept doing our content, kept doing our podcast, but we
Went
weren't
from
making that much
California,
money.
Hollywood to Florida. That was probably a big move. Why Florida?
Yeah. Well, because my wife grew up in South Florida, so we just wanted to move and wait out the pandemic in a house rather than an apartment in California. And we said, we'll figure it out. But then her family ended up moving to Orlando, so we ended up staying, and it ended up being really great. But yeah, we knew nobody. We just picked a random house on Airbnb. We drove cross country in the middle of the pandemic and had no job really, no friends, no nothing, and had to start a whole new life in the middle of the pandemic, which led to a whole different story, which I'll share another time. But ideally, we had to figure out what to do. So we were still doing content, making maybe $30,000 a year, so not too much. And then I started driving DoorDash, doing other things until we could figure out what to do. And then my wife's like, why don't we get into real estate? We love houses. We love doing sales. We can use our social media. I had about 200,000 followers across all platforms in 2020. And I was like, that sounds like a good idea. So we both got our license and we just learned the business. And we happened to get into the business when interest rates were 3%. So as soon as I started posting on social media about real estate, we were getting a lot of clients because everybody could afford to buy a house. So we had a really good couple years. And then fast forward to the summer of 2023, real estate's going amazing. And I had a client that came back after a year and a half and could not qualify for the average home in Florida, which was around 350 at the time.
And what year was that in?
That was was that 2022 or 20? I think it was 2023.
Okay, so they had bought around 2021 then?
They were going to, then they pulled out and then came back a year and a half later.
Oh, okay. So they didn't buy a home in 2021.
We went under contract.
The market to maybe correct, and
they
then
pulled. Yeah.
Okay. So what was their life like reapproaching the market in 2023?
They were just as surprised as we are, because he was making about $80,000 a year, and with his debts and with the price of the area he wanted to live, he could no longer do it. And he was like, but I was qualified just a year or two ago. What happened? I called my lender and I was like, what happened here? And I was like, can you explain the formula to me so that I could could know this? And he gave me like a formula to work with. And I made a video on social media and just said, hey guys, you need $120,000 now to buy the average house. And I made that video on TikTok and it went viral. And then I ended up going to a barbecue, talking to a boomer. And I was saying, the interest rates are at 7%. You need 120 now. And he said, well, back in the 80s, it was 14%. So it's all relative. And I was like, yeah, but they were like probably cheaper then, right? Went home, did some research, made a video, 1985 to 2023. It got 30 million views.
Whoa.
And the next day I woke up.
Viral video. Yikes. 30 million.
It was like 10 million on TikTok and 20 million on Instagram. Woke up the next morning, had 12 or 15 media inquiries, from the Laura Ingraham show to Fox and Friends to BuzzFeed, New York Times. I was like, what in the hell is this? And started doing all these interviews and then clipping the interviews, putting them on TikTok. They were going viral. And then between 2023 and now, sorry for the long-winded story, but from 23 to now, it just became something I was interested in discovering with my audience. So I wasn't an expert on this. I was just researching, learning things, looking up questions, making videos, and me and my audience grew together. So I went from about 200K followers to about 1.5 million in 2 years and became like the generational guy. And it just became a very wonderful business. And I even recently was able to kind of temporarily step away from real estate at the moment because I had other opportunities that came up. But I'm not totally closing the door on it, but I'm not actively doing it at the moment. I'm just kind of riding this wave and seeing where it'll take me. So we'll see my future in real estate. But 3 years in real estate changed my life and got me into this field. And I'm just super passionate and I just love figuring this out. And but yeah, that's kind of the long story there.
Well, it's a good story. The main part I pull out of that is you happened into seeing a problem. You initially started addressing it. And it sounds like to me, you didn't quite know the depths of the problem until you started receiving some of the initial feedback, some of the initial rebuttals, like you said, the boomer at the party saying, oh, well, rates were this back then, and they got even higher than 14%. But like you said, a lot of things were cheaper. What have you stumbled into over the last 3 years that has been one of the more surprising facts? And I want to tailor that question for the audience who may not know about your content. You only speak from receipts. You only speak from Census Bureau data, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, Federal Reserve of St. Louis Bank data that is a large part accepted as a neutral base for a lot of these stats. And you read them off, maybe you connect a couple things to know, okay, based off that interest at that time, this is what they would have been paying. But you're just bringing numbers to the table, and the numbers, like you said, are stark. Very quickly approaching needing more than $100,000 to own a home. And tell me about the initial sentiment versus today. Is there any difference between when you were talking about this in 2023 versus what you're talking about today, or does it largely feel the same in the comment section?
I think everybody as a whole has become way more educated. I think I just kind of got lucky to be in the forefront of it, but the housing price was the first problem. Yeah. It wasn't until rent became an issue, then groceries became like everything started to collapse like dominoes. And so every single generation, boomers ended up feeling it last. Boomers used to give me a lot of shit. Not shit in a bad way, but just like, oh, you're complaining, quit whining. But they even changed their tune a little bit, unfortunately, because it's harder for them now too. Originally in 2023, they weren't really renting. They owned a house that went up 50%. The stock market, I think at the time, was probably good. So they were like, you guys are just complaining. But then 2 years later, now everything's more expensive. Their property taxes went up, their insurance, the maintenance on their house, groceries, and they're on fixed incomes. So it took like 2-3 years before basically all of the middle class is now feeling the pain. But I didn't know this was all connected. It started with housing, but then when I looked back to the boomers and I go, well, things were cheaper. And also my life. I grew up in Ohio. I knew what my parents made. Like when I was growing up, when I went to a friend's house, it was a house. Like nobody was renting. Everybody owned. You could just tell there were people who were maybe a little poorer, middle class, and then someone was like upper middle class and had jet skis and a big house on the lake or something. You're like, holy crap, they're rich, which was like $320,000 back then.
Yeah.
For the house. So I was like, well, everyone owns a house. So when I started looking at these numbers, I was like, well, what has changed? And so it led me down that rabbit hole of the 40 years of terrible economic policies from both parties that were either created or upheld by both parties that destroyed the middle class. And we can go into however many you would like, but it's just a spider web that all lines up. And once you see it, you can't unsee it because it has been systematically done this way to transfer wealth to the top. And there's no governors put into place that can slow that down. And I just think it's important for us to keep talking about it because if you just look at 40 years of where we are and you run the numbers 40 years in the future, it doesn't look good. So it's important.
I think a lot of people have a hard time looking 10 years in the future. 40, Freddie. Yeah. I have a couple questions. I don't want us to breeze over a couple things you said. I'm very interested in what you found that policy-wise has changed the most. You mentioned boomers generationally taking seemingly more than their fair share, whether by accident or happenstance. What to you, and this is really my opening first question, what to you has caused the affordability crisis? If you were to be able to point at one item, if we can agree that today things are more unaffordable than maybe they should be, cost of living versus wages is more disparaged than it should be, more separated. How can we point to the one thing, or what is the one thing you would look at as that's it right there? If we could have gone back and changed this, maybe we have a better present.
It's kind of hard to just do one. It was like it took like all of these things to happen. But even when it came to the tax loopholes or little things like stock buybacks, or even when we started getting rid of manufacturing jobs and sending jobs overseas, there's a lot of data on that really started the downfall of the middle class. But I think the economic policies, like we had trickle-down economics, didn't trickle down. If you want to know the most bizarre and shocking figure that everyone can take away from this right here will explain the income inequality in one basic sentence. In the 1980s, Americans had about $30 trillion of wealth adjusted for inflation. So all Americans, about $30 trillion. Today in 2025, we have about $170 trillion as Americans. So if you look back at a country and point to it and say, look how great America's done. We've grown $140 trillion for our American citizens. We are the best country in the world, Zach. But of the $140 trillion of growth in the past 45 years, how many trillions went to the bottom 50%?
How much?
You have a guess?
That was from what year?
From about 1980-ish, somewhere in the early 1980s to today. So that's about, what, 45 years, $140 trillion of growth in America's wealth. Of the 140 trillion, how many trillions trickled down to the bottom 50, which is 170 million people?
I don't even want to guess. What is it?
$2 trillion.
So let me back that up for anyone who's hearing that. Here's a lot of numbers. So from 1980, let's call it 1980. 1980, we've added $140 trillion worth of wealth, which isn't income. It's not stocks. We're talking about $140 trillion in wealth. That could be an asset like a home, could be stocks, could be crypto, could be anything seen as an asset, wealth. We've created 140 trillion of it. And of that 140 trillion, we have allowed the bottom 50% to have access to 2 of that. 2 trillion of the 140. Yeah, I mean, to say that 138 has flown one way and 2 trillion floated another, that's a clear and obvious sign of the wealth gap's growth.
Exactly. So everything that happened with the trickle-down economics of trying to say, basically, we're going to cut taxes for companies, we're going to cut taxes for the rich so that they can have more money to expand and that money will trickle down, is that statistic alone is enough to debunk that entire thing. So that was one thing. Giving the companies all the tax breaks and having them have the power did not make it down to everyday Americans. And then on top of it, one more economic thing was the irresponsibility of us once we left the gold standard, that we just say, you know what, we're going to start increasing our debt. And then when quantitative easing started in the early 2000s and they started printing money, then it started devaluing the little money that the bottom 50% had, because most of the people in the bottom 50% aren't invested in assets. And only the assets are going to go up when they start printing money because they're protected from that inflation. So even a couple things like that was like the 1-2 punch that just lowered the value of the dollar for all the people who don't own assets. And that's just like 2 of like 100 things that started that snowball effect in the wrong direction.
Powerful snowballs. Powerful.
Yes.
To confirm the numbers, you said 30 trillion. We then added 140 trillion over the next 45 years or so. I ran some quick math right here as you're saying that. If we added 140 trillion and we only had 30 to begin with, that's more than a 4x increase. So it's almost 5x. It's almost a 4x increase. We've only so in a world where, let's just call it 400%, just for a flat number. It's a 400% increase. It's a little bit more. 400% increase in wealth available. But since the 80s, we've added only 50% to our population. So to me, as a layman, I hear there's 40 times as much potential wealth for me and my family. I'm sorry, 4 times as much potential wealth for me and my family. And it's not coming to me and my family. There's less people per dollar of wealth going around, and yet for some reason people feel broker than ever. Net worths of the middle class is lower than it's ever been in comparison to, like you said, the elites who are seemingly hoarding wealth.
And it's interesting too, because the bottom 50%, even as terrible as that sounds, almost sounds a little better, because you're like, well, the top 50% is doing well. But if you take it the top 10%, they're holding most of the wealth. I don't remember the exact amount of trillions they have. I want to say it's something like 40 trillion. No way. They have more than that.
I think it would be more than that. I don't know the stat either. It sounds like Sean's back there typing away, seeing if he could.
Yeah. What is the top 10%? Well,
unfortunately, we're not able to track any of those,
because my point to it is that in the top 50%, a lot of that middle ground is the old school middle class.
Yeah.
A lot of the boomers, because they have the pensions, they had the cheap houses they could buy, because they were having wages that actually made sense. They could save money, they could invest, they could get potentially a second home. That was the old school middle class. So some of them are still in the top 50%. But once the boomer generation leaves, I think that it's going to get even worse, because the new middle class doesn't have access to these kinds of assets. But at least the top 50 is holding a lot with the boomers. And they just worked ordinary, hardworking jobs, and they were able to become a millionaire on paper just by buying a house and working for 40 years. And now we as millennials and Gen Zers kind of have to be financial savants and work 60 hours and have side hustles and be really smart to even remotely have a chance to have that kind of money, or be a really high-skilled, high-paying individual.
Freddie, let's move to more recent times.
Yes.
Is COVID squarely to blame for today's economy? It's question number 2.
I think it's probably, I think it sped up the inevitable. I think we would have been here, this pain, the rent, the prices, the groceries, maybe 2030, maybe 2035. But I think because when COVID hit, the first thing they did, which you would probably know better than me, they lowered interest rates to try to help out homeowners. And then when you could go and get a 2% interest rate, it became the best investment to get housing. And I think that was the first domino. So because I don't think they would have dropped it to 2% if COVID didn't happen. It would have probably hovered at 4% like it was. Do you agree with that? Do you think rates would have stayed?
Rates pre-COVID were, and that's a great point, Fred, because a lot of people don't even talk about the fact that rates were still pretty low before COVID. People were floating around 3 and 4% rates, really rates since 2008, and our reaction from 2008. Rates have historically been low. You're right, though. The Fed dropped in, lowered rates to 0, allowed mortgages to go to 2%, car loans go 4 or 5%, credit card. People were able to take out more debt. So you would say that, again, it wasn't the square reason that things are the way they are, but it merely sped along what was already happening?
Yeah, because if you look at the trajectory, even from 2010 till now, like, it was better in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, but it was still, things were getting more expensive. College was getting more expensive. Rent was getting more expensive. Minimum wage hasn't gone up since 2009. So it was inevitably, through printing money, borrowing money, doing everything we were going to do, I think we would have hit this, but it would have dripped on us. The 25% inflation we experienced since COVID is what shocked us and woke us up. If they would have kept the scam going, just dripping on us, they would have probably smoked us a little longer, and we would have woke up in 2035 being like, now maybe a few more millennials would have got on to the American dream. They might have had a little more time to buy a house, so maybe the Gen Zers would have been the screwed generation and the alphas. But because of COVID, I think it sped it up and just decked the millennials.
But Freddie, millennials and Gen Z that don't own a home or just sitting on the sideline are just complaining. It's a weak generation, right? Like, why is that something that a lot of older generations seemingly like to kind of they want to hold their ground there. They want to put their hat on that as the reason for the wealth gap, as the reason for why things are the way they are. Why does the older generation keep doing that? And is there any credence to it? Is there really some reason that Gen X doesn't have a home, doesn't want to have kids, doesn't even want to maybe leave their parents' house because of unaffordability? Is it because they're weak? Is it because they're just lazy? Why?
I think it's a lot of things. I think that the boomers really benefited from the system. And if you're trying to critique the system, I think they just get a little fearful of it. And they kind of take offense when we say, oh, it's so hard, when they did work 40, 50 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that I can't bridge with them sometimes, where I'm just like, I'm not saying you didn't work hard. You had to go from LA to New York in a vehicle, which was very long, very grueling, flat tires, detours, storms, snow, having to get lost.
Yeah.
You know, everything that was happening. And you got to New York, and now us kids are saying, oh, it's such a long ride. And you're like, stop complaining. But we're on a fucking bicycle. Same distance, same detours, same problems.
Got it. I
but
hear
on
the
a
analogy.
bicycle, because everything is much harder now. But the complaining I used to take to heart, because I go, am I being a whiny bitch like people are saying in my comments when I originally started? But once I saw the data, I knew that I was right. So it kind of alleviated that for me, where I go, I'm not wrong here. This is going to get worse and we need to stop it. And the complaining, I like to look at it in a positive way, as digital protesting. The boomers, and I don't blame them for this, they did not have access to social media like we do to actually make change or to get the information. If I had to read this all in books, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at today, because that's not my style of learning. The fact that I can use YouTube and Google and ChatGPT to research and double check and learn and bring that to people, we need to show what the government's been doing and what the rich has been doing, crushing the middle class, and stop it. Not really so millennials can get ahead. It's so that our children can actually go back to living a life where they have hope and purpose. I don't know what the millennials are going to do. We might just be the rebuild generation. And it might take till the boomers are out of office, and it might take till the older generation moves on in life. But we're going to be responsible for the rebuild of America if we want any remnants of the old American dream. So we have to let the majority of people know, here's the numbers. This isn't my opinion. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the numbers. We need to get things changed. We need to change some of the tax loopholes. We need to allow a piece of that wealth to be funneled to the bottom so that people can buy a house, save for school if they want, and actually have hope. That's what we're missing as a generation, is that hope. Living paycheck to paycheck is very hopeless.
I agree. With a couple things you just said there, I'd like to ask, and this is again possibly for the older generation that's listening, why aren't people leaving their parents' house? Are there numbers to back why this is happening more?
I mean, I think it's brilliant. If you have a good relationship with your parents, stay until you're 21, 22, 23. Just make it count. You know, don't just sit at home and not work. Like, really go out and bust your ass and save money. I think it's rent. Any TikTok that I see of parents that are like in their 30s and 40s, maybe even 50s, that have a teenager that is trying to get an apartment, they're just like, what the hell? So they're seeing that because you can't have an 18-year-old go get a $1,600 apartment.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Nor are they going to get approved for it because they don't have a credit history and they're not making enough. And
yeah, and if their parents co-sign, it's like you still can't unless your parents are going to pay half of it. But it's like now the parents are burning $800, the kid's burning $800, when you could just stay at home and just have a financial plan to save that money. Like if you're like, I'm going to live here to my 21st birthday, but I'm going to work and save every penny. I'm going to do chores around the house. I'm going to save every single penny and start putting money into the stock market. I mean, if you didn't have any bills and lived at home for 3 years, those 3 years you could make count.
But Freddie, if I'm on the outside looking in and I see a 25-year-old choosing to stay at home while getting their career started, coming back from college and moving back in with the parents, that's not what we did back in the day. Back in the day, the stats show very clearly, and I'm sure many people can remember, you turn 18, you get out of the house. Why are these young adults choosing to not progress their lives? Is it strictly financial?
I would agree it's strictly financial. I think back when we grew up, I forget how old are you again?
I'm 31 years of age, my friend. I'm an ancient artifact.
So you're a little younger than me. I'm 37. When I graduated high school in 2006, the reason if you stayed home with your parents, you were considered an air quotes loser, is because you could go get a job at Lowe's, you could get a job at McDonald's, you could get a job at the gas station, you could get a job at the mall, and you could use that income to rent yourself an apartment and furnish it and eat peanut butter and jelly and drive a $2,200 piece of shit car, but you were just going back and forth to your first job. So there was a lot of lessons in that, to leave the house, to understand money, to go have a little bit of pressure. Even if you got a roommate, you know, it's cool to live with your friends when you're young. You could save a little bit of money. So if you were going to sit home, smoke weed, play video games, not take out the trash, not mow the lawn, people would call you a loser. Now, the data doesn't support that. I actually encourage people, if they have a good relationship with their parents and it's not toxic or weird and you got to get the fuck out, you should stay as long as possible, but have a plan. Don't be lazy with it. Don't, you know, you have to really have a plan. Can I say just one other thing real quick before we?
No, you're not allowed to at all.
I'm not
You
allowed.
can say
Okay.
as many things as you'd like, please.
So there's this new there's this new concept, and now that we're talking about 18 years old, this is really important for people to know as well. And this is the whole thinking outside the box. I know what I'm about to say is unrealistic for most people, but I just want you to take it as an out of the box, new kind of option and plan that's basically never been talked about. Because you go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, you get a job, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't work anymore for most people. So we have to think outside the box. What do? Stay home, maybe do this, do that. But here's something really important that I'm kind of working through. I know it sounds ridiculous. If you were to turn 18 years old and your entire goal from 18 to your 21st birthday for 3 years, nothing else mattered but working a job or two and making about $30,000 a year, saving $25,000 of it by living at home with your parents, because your parents might be on board with this. If you save $25,000, $25,000, $25,000, and on your 21st birthday, you take a shot, you take the 75 grand and put it into the stock market, and you never invested another penny for the rest of your life, at 70 years old, I think it would be worth close to $3 million.
I don't doubt those numbers. Yeah, compound interest is a huge thing.
In 3 years, you could check off one of the biggest stressors that all adults have. At 21, you could then go get a college degree if you wanted. You could then go do whatever, but the biggest thing, retirement, is no longer a worry. Because if you care about retirement in your 40s, it ain't going to take just 3 years because the compound interest won't have enough time. But just, you don't have to be that extreme, but I'm just saying think outside the box of like, what's the goal here? Because we have to be financially responsible these days. And that's why I'm encouraging parents too. When we're making these videos, it's not even just for us millennials to get out of debt or how to win. It's for the millennials who have 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds of like, you've got 5 years to teach them this so that when they're going to go to college or they're trying to, and they have to know before graduating high school what investments are for retirement, how much college is, what the interest is, what the monthly payments are, how much you're going to make, if a 401k and health insurance is taken out, what's your take-home pay. God, I wish I could do a class on all that. I would be so happy. I'd love to teach.
I think a lot of people sign up for it. And what you're saying is if you have the opportunity to live with family, that's the pre-existing condition in this experiment. You have the ability to either live with a friend, live with parents, live somewhere next to, if not rent-free. Taking that opportunity, instead of going to college, instead of going out and living the young life like a lot of people want to do, myself included, have that time period in my life, but instead focusing 100%, go get that 30K, 40K, even better, 50K spectacular, save as much as you can, if that's 80%, 70%, 90%, and then when drinking day hits in America, 21, you throw it into the stock market. People would say, what do you invest into? I'm sure you're going to say index funds, the S&P 500 overall. Could be in gold, could be in bonds. But overarchingly, you're getting your nest egg. You're plugging it against something that's going to return a yield for you, return on investment for you. And as long as you don't look at it, you forget your password purposefully to kind of, that due to this thing called compound interest, which I think a lot of people would benefit a lot from just Googling like a graph of compound interest and seeing like if you had a penny every day for 30 days, how many would you have? Like you're seeing that doubling effect. It's very powerful and it's very pivotal that it starts early because it's just like you said, you start at 35, 40, completely different outcome. I don't dislike that idea at all, but that completely goes against go to college, get your degree, get out of the house, go get your picket fence and 1.5 kids.
But you can go to college at 21.
Yeah, you can go to college whenever you'd like.
Right.
That's very true. Why do we all think you have to go at 18?
Yeah, and we're living longer. And even if you waited till 25, people feel like, well, if I don't go to college and I don't know what I'm going to do, it's like, just go work because you're going to learn about money. You're going to learn about taxes. You're going to learn about your interests.
And I think there's several people that want to learn a trade. Want to get into something that maybe doesn't require a college degree. I for one, think in a world that is more AI by the day, that anything you can do working with your hands and bringing value to having to physically be in person is really powerful because plumbers aren't going to get replaced by AI. I mean, I say in the near future. I mean, I hope to God we're not to that point where a robot plumber shows up at my house ready to do.
Yeah,
don't think we're
I
paying
think that. I mean, that I see that being maybe like 20 years.
Yeah, who
But an
knows?
accountant, that
Yeah.
could be
Oh my
5.
goodness. Yeah. Yeah. Like a paralegal, like an accountant, like a mortgage underwriter. Like these are things that are going to be AI'd. Sean and I were just talking about the lower income bracket kind of skill-less jobs, food, retail, lower than management positions that these places are going to be taken by technology. So to summarize again, you're saying get in, save, and if you can stay with parents, it's no longer the loser thing to do. In fact, it might be the smartest thing you can do. Let me hit you with this question. Since you remember as a child to today, let's take teenage Freddy. Teenage Freddy's going out 2005, 2004, 2006 versus Freddy's going out in 2024, 2025, 2026. What's gone up most significantly for you in your life? I'll give an example. For me, Taco Bell. If I were to go in 2005, we did the math right beforehand too, just to confirm. If I wrote it down, if you were to go to Taco Bell 2005, 2015, or today, all 10 years apart, if you were to go in 2025 to get 2 soft tacos, a Crunchwrap Supreme, a cheesy gordita crunch, and a large Mountain Dew, what a meal. It's going to cost you about 18 to 20 bucks depending on your market today. If you did that in 2015, you're paying about $12, and if it's 2005, it's $8.79. So significant difference right there in my life with my Taco Bell addiction to see, okay, a $10 bill went a long way to now feeding two family members and a kid is now a $35 adventure, a $40 venture at Taco Bell. So what for you has gone up that you don't think gets enough attention or has been more extreme than people give light to?
I mean, it depends. I would say the biggest thing that's crushing people is rent. But if you're looking at little things, when it comes to like food, I mean, McDonald's, Taco Bell, getting groceries, even going on beer runs. I mean, you could get a 30-pack of Keystone Light, I think, for $10 when I was growing up. And you'd be at a party and someone's like, who's going on a beer run? Everyone would pull out $1 or $2 and you just threw it in a hat and people would go and get it. Or you could order pizzas. I think you could get Domino's pizzas delivered you could get 2 pizzas for $20 or something. So it was much easier to survive. Even that thing people, if we go through a recession, how did you guys deal with it in 2008? It's like, because nothing was expensive. Our rent was cheap.
Can I bring up a very interesting point that verifies exactly what you're saying? In the 2008 housing market crash, do you know in the following years which industry actually thrived, had some of its best years? Fast food. People were going toward cheaper options, quicker options. And a lot of people point also to movie theaters and other things of ways of escape. Fast food's a great escape. Today, we're actually seeing these companies like McDonald's and other food industries reporting we are in a bad scenario. People are choosing not to eat here because it is too expensive in a market where things are ultimately less affordable. So we're seeing a completely different reaction now to something that has been seen as the cheap, easy escape option versus now it's not. And it's interesting you bring up food, because that's a
and
huge one.
It's the entertainment aspect too that I think people miss. It's the quality of life. Like today, can you go to the grocery store and make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for cheap instead of going to McDonald's? Yes. But it's like, again, you're chipping away at everything that someone, like when we were broke kids in our early 20s, going to Taco Bell at 10:30 at night to go spend $2 a piece and sit in the lobby and flirt with girls and chat with each other and then drive home and go play video games. That's a fun night compared to the kids now who are like, we need to save money. Hey, Greg, go get the peanut butter and bread. Can't wait to crush you in this video game. Like no one's like, even the little things of going out to Subway, $5 footlong, going to a movie, going to sit at, you could actually have fun for no money. Even in Los Angeles, one of the most expensive places. So that's where I grew up in my 20s, was Los Angeles. So everything was so expensive. Looking back now, it's dirt cheap. But we could go and get dollar beers at so many restaurants. They would use that as a ploy to get people in, and then we'd split appetizers. That doesn't exist now. You go out for two
We were
beers with
just
your
talking
buddy, we're
about two
dropping
for 20
$60.
at Applebee's. Yeah, 2 for 20. Two people could sit down, have an appetizer, 2 dinners and a dessert, 2 drinks, $20.
Yeah. And I think that hits the nerve of all this now that we've talked that out a little bit. I think that's the sad part. It's not even that the money, of course that's stressful, but when you don't have any money even for the simple pleasures, and people are trying to say don't even go to Starbucks. It's like, well, what do you want us to do for 20 years?
No avocado toast.
No, nothing. You just eat ramen noodles and drive to and from work and stare at a wall. You can't have Netflix. You can't drink coffee. You can't go to McDonald's. It's like, well, what do you want people to do in their life for 20 years? Just save money when nothing's guaranteed anyway. So that, I think that's to bring it back to the last question of like the whole complaining thing. It's like, of course you're going to complain. Our living standard has declined drastically for the youth. It's like, where's the simple pleasures? We can only get it cheap online now. So we're just glued to our phones because it's cheap dopamine and basically free compared to a 2 Big Mac for $3 meal.
Wow. I think we could go off on a whole complete different tangent than I planned for, just talking about what you just said, the feelings of today's economy, and mixed with what do you go to, and what used to be, hey, let's go walk around the mall because I'm bored and broke, versus today, let me doom scroll and see everybody else's amazing life and compare it to my own. Probably has a long-term residual effect. But I want to focus on the middle class here and shift more into the wealth gap.
Okay.
The wealth gap has grown exponentially really since when you mentioned the 80s and the mid-70s. We had a savings and loan crisis. We had the detethering from gold. We had the introduction of the petrodollar. We had the introduction of private equity, the introduction of adjustable rate mortgages, the Fair Housing Credit Act, the completely restructuring multiple times of our tax bracket system. In 2004 and 2012, we had different acts that allowed for more margin investing by these big companies. And more, we saw more big business buy up more of our economy. You've already brought this up with how the wealth grew and seemingly stayed with a select group. So my question to you is there a ticking time bomb on the middle class, Freddie? Are we looking at something imminent?
Yeah, I mean, it's Mission Impossible and there's 7 seconds on the bomb.
Man.
We gotta figure something out because you just summed it up wonderfully. I mean, those are all little things that created the downfall of the middle class, and it's just super sad. I don't feel right about it.
We're looking at the last few chapters of an already written book, or is there something that could change?
I mean, I don't want to make too many predictions on like any doomsday thing because I am
No, do it. We'll clip it. Make sure it goes viral.
Person.
Make sure people hold you to it.
Yeah. So,
for example, I think of what was that old movie with the 3 ghosts? Not The Nightmare Before Christmas. Gosh, that's a Tim Burton one. The one with the 3 ghosts, past, present, and future. And he gets shown the future. Scrooge. Thank you, Sean.
Oh, yeah.
Scrooge. And the third guy comes. He's like, are you showing me things that are to be or will be? Like, is there a chance at changing this outcome? I guess that's my question. Are we just kind of sitting on the train heading toward the destruction of the middle class? Or is there actually something that could be done to shift us momentum-wise in another direction?
Well, there's a few ways to look at it. I think to start it off, and I'd love for the audience to participate in this too, is what do you define as the middle class? I think some people have different definitions, but what would you define the middle class as, Zach?
Well, I think the question you brought up or the statement you brought is fine. If you're listening, 1 sentence or less, comment, because we're not the geniuses here. 1 sentence or less, comment what you would define as the middle or working class. What I would define as the middle class is the heartbeat that keeps the country moving. They're the ones that are on the ground floor producing the productivity that makes companies profitable. They're the ones working the 9-to-5 jobs, and if they were to stop for 2 weeks to a month, they wouldn't be able to support themselves. They're the people that 15 years of freedom at the end of their working life as the game's prize, retirement, the game's prize to all their hard work, and they will put in 30, 40, 50 hours of work. We're looking at someone, honestly, in the middle class, I would define as someone who was born to work until they retire. And I think the definition shifts in the future as the retirement age moves up and the amount of money you need to save to retire keeps going up. So maybe that last stage becomes a mirage, but I would assign it as really the spine of the economy. You can't run an economy without a middle class, a working class, without people that are actually bringing real production to these companies that tout their profit margins and tout their gains quarter over quarter. And it all comes down to the person creating the thing that they produce. It all comes down to the middle class worker admin that's doing the scheduling, that's getting the things logged. It comes down to the worker on the line that's packaging. And for me, it's also one of the most ignored segments of our economy because just like you said, they hold so little of the wealth. They hold so little of the cash. They hold so little of the economic impact that you can almost ignore them. And I would, in parcel, say it's probably it's probably defined also as the ignored class. You have the lower impoverished that need help, social issues that go into welfare, Medicare, Section 8. And then you have the wealthy issues that get addressed by all the politicians and the bills. And then the middle class kind of gets ignored.
Yeah.
What would you think? That's a long-winded. It definitely wasn't one sentence. A few sentences.
No. Yeah. I think, no, you're totally right. It is the heartbeat. It's what builds this country. And I think it's the, not only the heartbeat, but the culture, because there should be so many working and middle-class people. And that's the culture when everybody has hope. Everyone's buying a house. Everyone's getting their kids into school and getting new school clothes and Christmas and decorating for Halloween, that cultural happiness and purpose. And I think with middle class, I don't think you can get a middle class stamp. And this has been true for 50 years up until about 2021. You can't be middle class if you can't own a piece of property. I think that's a staple. So if you think about number one, when you ask, is the middle class dead? Well, the middle class doesn't really make 90 to 100,000. So they can't really afford a house anymore, which is a huge knock to the middle class. We've talked about this before. 2 used vehicles, not 23,000, but like 15,000. That's with insurance and gas, another $1,000 or $1,200 just for used cars. So the middle class doesn't really have the disposable income that they once had. So the question becomes, well, how do we save the middle class? I think step one, the most important thing, is getting people into houses and figuring out economic policies, regulations. Maybe it's 3D printing. I don't know what people have to figure out to do to make the cost cheaper, but getting most Americans into a property is going to help grow the middle class so that they're not burning money or on this never-ending treadmill of raising rent prices. So I think that's number one if we want to even have a resemblance of the middle class. Because what's going to be left of the middle class is just a lower quality of living. There's going to be multiple families living in a house, or you're just going to say, fuck it, I'm just going to rent with a few people who are cool that I happen to get along with and just go live my life without getting the house. But it's just going to be a lower standard of living. I don't think we're going to end up in a breadline, but the standard of living has declined. And that's what's sad, especially with children. Like even my wife and I, there's no way we're going to have 3 kids. We're also getting too probably old to have 3 kids, but we'll have 1 maybe. But the idea of being able to, even with our great incomes, to raise 3 kids with daycare and all that, like now we have to choose about family because prices are so high. So I think that would be the first thing to answer your question is to be middle class, to help our middle class, we've got to have home ownership available again. And I think that should be the country's and government's number one priority.
You're leading me perfectly into question number 6, but question number 5 is the middle class approaching harder times? Is there a ticking time bomb on their existence? You would say the momentum is pushing toward there's 7 seconds left on the bomb. It's gonna happen. Affordability will keep growing harder, and there will be even deeper of a crisis, a deeper divide in the wealth gap, you're saying. And you're saying, and this is why it perfectly leads into my next question, a lot of it has to do with home ownership. The next question, will we look at home ownership as the deciding factor in 10 years as to whether or not someone was able to achieve wealth or not?
I believe so. I think the millennials and Gen Zers are going to be the grieving generation of home ownership, because I think we're kind of going through that process where we still have hope that maybe prices will come down. Maybe we can get another job. Maybe we can start making more. Maybe we'll get married, put our income together, and still be able to buy. There's a little hope still for some, but we're kind of going through the grieving process as a generation that home ownership is now going to be kind of like how we grew up looking at yachts and private jets.
Well, let me
where
pause you
it's
there,
not
because
guaranteed.
as we sit right here, you're saying we're in a grieving process. Grieving means death.
Yeah.
So you're saying that this homeownership opportunity for maybe future generations and Gen Z as a whole is going to die as a dream when you're saying grieving. Is that what you're saying? That it's probably going to get worse? And the second question I want to add to that, because that's more or less not a physical reality question, the grieving, is, are home prices ever going to come down?
I mean, I don't know. I think the thing we don't want is unemployment to get high and for people to lose their jobs, and that be the reason, because then we're going to be in a whole lot of crap. But unless they can increase the supply, or again limit people to investing in all the properties. But I just don't like infringing too much on, as much as I'm all about taxing the wealth, there's got to be a way that makes it fair so that people can still build wealth in this country, that the mom and pop person can buy 7, 10, 12, 15 properties. Even if you want to build a portfolio of 50 properties, I don't think that's bad. I think that's part of the American dream. It's very difficult to do, and if you can pull that off, you deserve that money. But when you have corporations coming in, buying up an entire new build community and renting them out, or buying up huge portions of everything, and even rich people in general, borrowing against their assets to buy more assets, they're not even really working for the money at that point. They're working for it because they're smart and they're utilizing the system. But the more assets they buy, the more out of reach it comes for the people below. And then the millennials who are hanging on by a thread, who are trying to buy, even like my wife and I, we were about 2 years too late. We made it all this time to 35. If we would have just been ready at 33, we would have locked in a house like you at $1,200 a month and just been like, but we had to wait till when we bought, and now our payment's $3,000 a month instead of $1,200, and that $1,800 extrapolated over time. We got to make more money and make better decisions, but just a 2-year difference. Think about how crazy that is. And so that's why I say about the whole grieving process, because I think there's a large portion of the generation that's like, yeah, fuck this. Like, I'm never going to own. Like, their path, their family, like, there's like, this is impossible. But there is another portion that's watching the bomb tick, and I think they might have time. If prices kind of dip a little bit, they're saving. Maybe they can buy down the interest rate, things like that. But we're just all segmented. There's not a one thing fits all, because each generation is in a different place, where it never used to be like that. The middle class was the middle class. Now it's broken into a middle class differential between each generation. So that's why there's confusion and so much fighting.
I'm going to skip question 7 and go straight to question 8, because I think you're already dancing around it. We talk about this grieving process, and we talk about the next generation, and there are stats and sentiments and surveys that could back that there's a lot of unknown about the future. The one known that we seem to have is what's happened historically. Wealth get wealthier, rich get richer, poor get poorer, and that housing prices typically only go up. It's a lot of the reason why a lot of people own real estate. It's one of the best investments. It's commoditized. What's the ideal scenario moving forward for someone on the outside looking in? If someone's watching the game right now, they're watching all the prices go up, they're watching everything get more expensive, they know asset ownership, they understand that owning stocks, owning housing, they get that. They know enough to know that that's a good choice, but they can't get in. What's the ideal scenario over the next 5 years for a person like that?
Well, this is all tried and true stuff that I think people know, but again, really, really spend the time to learn exactly what everything costs, how to make a budget, and try with all your might to figure out how to create a second job for yourself and utilize that money to pay down debt, to save. Like, you're never going to be upset saving money. Even if you try to save money for 6 years and you finally have $50,000 and now houses shoot up again, it's like, okay, well, you got $50,000, so good for you. Now if you have to rent, but at least you have a cushion, at least you're investing. But that's all we can do. You have to put the tried and true, put a budget together, see what you can sacrifice. You and I talked about this before. Instead of just sacrificing what people tell you, pick your sacrifice. If you're struggling financially, you have to sacrifice something, but you get to choose what you want to sacrifice. Do you want to?
What would you suggest that sacrifice be? If someone's listening right now, like, Freddie, I don't know what to sacrifice. I feel like if I sacrifice something, I'm gonna either be broke, starving, or on the street.
I would. I mean, the biggest thing is a temporary living situation.
What do you mean by that?
If you have to sell everything, or if you have to move in with a friend for a year, or you have to move to Oklahoma or Mississippi and do remote work, but you're renting for $600 there, and you and your partner are doing remote work, and you're just going to eat peanut butter and jelly, and for that whole entire year, you're going to save up $30,000, $40,000, and now that's a down payment to move back to Florida.
Is that your
or to do
go-to
something.
poor food, the peanut butter and jelly? I always go to ramen. I think when times are tough for me, ramen.
Oh, peanut butter and jelly is so much better. I think it's more filling, less sodium. Peanut butter and jelly I ate peanut butter and jelly all the time, so that's why I use it. That was my go-to as a kid in my 20s, just quick, easy.
I knew we were broke growing up in my family because going back, I remembered, okay, what did we always eat? It was warm-up fish sticks.
Yes, with
and
ketchup.
And it was tomato, cheese, and mayo sandwiches. Oh, you don't like a tomato? That's classic right there. Tomato, cheese, and lettuce, or tomato, cheese, and mayo?
No. Tomato's not my thing unless it's
Throw
on
a little,
like a sandwich.
throw a little pepper on. You don't like mayo?
I like mayo.
Oh, you don't like tomatoes, what you said?
Yeah, unless they're like in like a turkey club, I won't mind it. But just like tomatoes on bread or tomatoes as a whole.
What is it,
like
a
I'll pick
texture
them out
thing?
of a salad. Huh?
Is it a texture thing?
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
You like salsa?
Yes.
Okay, so you like everything about the tomato.
And the ketchup.
Not the tomato.
And the tomato sauce, yeah, but not
Yeah.
the actual larva, slimy, soft.
Larva? Is that what you
Like
said?
larva.
All right, we're going to move on to our next question here, sir. So if the ideal scenario moving forward for like what a person can do, I heard you answer, what could somebody do? And it could be a lot of sacrificing. What about on what we can't control, at least at a micro level, the scenario our government's in, the scenario our economy is in? What's the ideal scenario there? What could change that could shift the momentum a different direction?
I think it's a couple things. Like, one of the things I've been a huge proponent of is making borrowing against your assets a taxable event.
Okay.
If you want to borrow and not pay capital gains, and you want to get a free $20 million, make that a taxable event so that you can at least pay something in. Looking at the tax system to be able to be able to use some of the income from this top 1% to fund certain projects. But the government also has to get on the same page. You can't just take from the rich and just throw it into the big pile of money. It's got to be organized. We have to see transparency, but what they need to actually change a little bit of the tax code so that it can go down to the people. And all the government has to do is start caring about us more than they care about capitalism. That's the overarching. Because anytime someone says our country's doing great, they don't mean our country. They mean our capitalism's doing great. Because anything they point to isn't our country. If you were going to point to our country, you would point to the people. And the
What do you
people
mean by
are
that?
you would point to the people. You'd say, look, everybody owns a home. Relationships are up. The birth rate is up. People's disposable income is up. Their happiness is up. They're traveling more. They're stimulating the economy. They're not on medications. They're not overweight. They're healthy. They're hopeful. That is when you say our country's doing great. They don't mean that. They mean the GDP is up, the stock market is up, unemployment's down, and inflation is under control. Those are 4 components of capitalism, not the country. As long as those 4 things are good, media and politicians will point to it, and Ivy League economists, and go, look how great America is. No, not the country. That's the people. You're talking about capitalism. There's a big difference. But the people are sick. They're broke. They're frustrated. They're hopeless. That's the overall culture shift that we need. So are there things like having taxable events for certain things? Is there a way to tax the rich in a very creative way that's also fair but can go? Yes. But also we need better leadership. We can't allow the greedy corporations to be running our country, which they are. We can't have people who are 75 years old who are on a stand saying, we can't raise minimum wage. And then they don't even get it. Like they're saying you can't raise minimum wage, but they're not running the math. They're just saying whatever the donors are saying. Like we need a full reboot. Get the fuck out. They need term limits. You need one issue bills. We need transparency. And I think that our generation, we are woken up. We're pissed. We're frustrated. And it would be really fun. I'd love to be a part of that in history. That it was the bomb was about to go off and the millennial generation came together using social media and tools to rebuild our country to the greatest country in the world because we're not selfish assholes. We actually want people to be happy. So I think it's an assertive effort.
And it sounds like that assertive effort starts with unification.
Yes, unification. Another thing we need to change. Ban super PACs. Why the hell was it passed? It's dividing our country. There's just so many little things, but we need unification.
What's a super PAC?
Super PACs allow billionaires and corporations to donate unlimited money to campaigns, but they don't go into the hands directly. That's illegal. They can't directly give it to Trump or Harris or whoever's going to run. They have to put it into a super PAC that can spend that money, hundreds of millions or even billions, on attack ads. So they are raising billions of dollars to run attack ads on television to make you hate the candidate they don't want to win. And they have a little more leeway as a super PAC to not have to be 100% transparent, like with the actual candidate. If this message is by Donald Trump, there's a lot more scrutiny. If it's your campaign spending the money, it's got to be a little more accurate and but if it's a super PAC, they get away with a little more twisting of the narrative, and it's dividing the country. And you want to hear one more other thing that's bad about this? There's something called dark money, where these billionaires can run their money through a nonprofit and the nonprofit into the super PAC. And because it's through a nonprofit, you can be anonymous. So if they run it through that course, you don't even know what billionaire paid for these attack ads. You have no way of tracking it. And this is new. This was like 2010 or something.
Yeah, Citizens United.
Yeah. Terrible idea. Why would you do that? There should be a limit. You can't have people buying the election. So yeah, just little things like that, man, that would just change our country around so quickly, and it would unite us. That's the one thing I haven't figured out how to do. And that's why I don't get into politics online, because every time I think of an idea, there's millions of people saying the same thing, and it doesn't seem to be healing the country. So I'm like, why am I going to get in this fist fight or this firefight when I just don't see people really coming together? Do you? Like, do you see any sort of healing politically, or are we more divided?
I'm not in the rooms that make the decisions happen enough, I believe, to know is there any systemic change going on, like what you're asking, like at the lawmaking portion of our government, our legislative branch. Is there any change that's stemming from there that'll shift policy, shift the direction we're going, repeal or add back things that obviously cause some carnage to our economy? I don't know. I'd say there's no evidence of it. I'd say there's no evidence of seeing bills that kind of shake up the narrative, or lawmakers that aren't getting lobbying dollars to the tunes of tens, if not hundreds of thousands, to sway their opinions. There's no evidence, but again, I'm not in those rooms. What would you say it would take to unify? Because I think a lot of people that hear these messages and hear about the economy and hear about what's going on with who our government officials are, who they're influenced by, how much they're getting paid, and sometimes even anonymously, you don't even know who's paying them. You hear all this stuff and it's angering, it's frustrating, but then I think there's another side to that same person who thinks, well, what do I do? So what actually causes that unification? Just be very clear. You just said you're not 100% sure, so I don't want to pin you somewhere on a tough question.
I mean, I have a theory, but I'm saying I don't have it with conviction. This is more of just my opinion. I think the media on both sides over the past 10 years has done such a great job, not a great job because it's negative, but props to their propaganda like expertise. They've split people into, you're either love Trump or you hate Trump. And that's what our entire political system has become, which really presses the people in the middle, that you're almost forced that if you lean left or lean right, they're going to pull you in to you either love Trump or hate Trump. And I think we need Trump to leave, and we need completely new blood, and hopefully that will stop, because there's people who are just like going to follow Trump to the ends of the earth, and then there's people who think he's a dictator and they hate him. That's like the only two groups that are noisy online. And then if we're here in the middle and we kind of like things from both sides, you're still deemed not a team player. So I think more than anything, if we only have two teams, you're always going to have division.
So you think unification would start from a new blood of leadership? Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up the Trump thing, because I know a lot of people will think today and think this term. But what you said, honestly, with you either hate or you love, or, hey, you have to make a decision as to whether you hate or love, because that's going to determine my friendship level with you or whether or not we can talk anymore, has actually really been going on for 10 years, really since the campaign began in 2015 for his initial term. That started. And even during his election, he would lose to Biden. A lot of that noise remained. Still my president. He's still president behind the scenes. Not my, like, that all persisted and bled into the current. And so it's not a recent or more only in the present thing. This has been going on for a while. And I think there's a lot of people in the Gen Z demographic specifically that have been raised to think that this is all politics is and can be. And I think you're spot on to say that unification could be sparked by some new breed of authentic leadership.
Yes, where it's not, because even if you look at a Bernie Sanders, he to me is more independent, and I like a lot with what he says.
Yeah, just shave 20 years of his age, and I think he's a prime candidate.
Yes, but he also at the same time is like, he's still a Donald Trump is bad.
Explain that.
And if you're trying to like he's not someone who's an independent that says, here's some good things that Trump are doing, here's some good things the Democrats are doing. He's an independent who is far left in a sense, or leans left, but I don't think gives Trump much credit either. So if you again are an independent who's like, hey, I'm not a Democrat, I'm going to be the new Democratic independent person, but fuck MAGA, that's creating the division. You can have that opinion, but if we need an independent that comes in, that is a true independent, and we need to vote as a nation of young voters, literally both sides out. We need, in Congress and everything, like everyone needs voted out, and we need a fresh start. Because all the ads they run, all the propaganda, I don't think the young kids we're not fooled by it. I think we could get together, but it's scary to say, well, we're going to vote all these people out. Well, who's going to take over? Like, there's no one that inspires me in politics. There's people I'm like, well, I'd rather this person or I'd rather this person, but there's no one that I'm like, yeah, you are like, yes, like you're who I'm looking for. If someone could really tackle the middle and just smash it and win as an independent, even if they were left or right, but just really won where you could proudly be in the center and say, I'm agreeing with you, because I agree with most stuff. Like, I'm not extreme. Most of us all agree with the stuff in the middle, a little from both. But there's no one who's been able to articulate
we've
or run
talked about
on
a few times, and you just brought up single issue bills, term limits for lawmakers, age limits for lawmakers. You've talked about before having a flat gross revenue tax. I think decomplicating the tax system, again, is something that large part most people would agree on as a concept, and how we view our country. You brought it up best, I think, earlier when you said that we point toward these four main variables as the health of our country, when in reality we're only talking about the health of our economy. And a lot of that is global trade dependent, and a lot of it's inflationarily caused. It's because we've printed money. But to your point, talking about where is the wealth? And where is our mental health? Where is our community? Where is our unity? That's something that's lacking. I'm going to finish off with this question. I had 10 questions. We're going to get to 8. Toughest question I've asked. What's the one thing, if you could go back and change one thing or point the blame at one thing or person, what would it be for today's current economic scenario? Paint it with whatever color you'd like.
It's tough, man. I think it was, I don't know what the specific would be, but I think it was during the 80s. I think it was when they started messing with the tax code that allowed, when they decided to do the whole trickle-down economics that never worked. I think that was the single most, like, was that an individual economic plan? Do you know the specific thing that was
I think
passed?
there were 4 individual items because the tax, so we had, I think it was called the American Recovery Act or in 81, Reagan shifted the tax code, restructured things. What also happened in 81 was we had industrial deregulation, where a lot of red tape was taken off, a lot of safety requirements for food, medicine, airline travel even. A lot of red tape removed. Led to more profit at the top. And trickle-down economics was what it was called, but we
that
know it
whole
didn't.
section of it, right?
Yeah, his whole 8-year term. And he walked into a very tough economy. We were exiting the savings and loan crisis. We were exiting and entering into a stagflation period that could only get solved by inevitably really high rates from the Federal Reserve. That had a lot to do with the unaffordability. But at the end of the middle of his 8 years, there was another tax shift, and that's when things really shifted because the top marginal tax rate dropped dramatically. That was huge. I honestly, if you were to say if there was one thing in the whole Reaganomics, it was the favoring of banks and corporations via the mass deregulation, via just adding fuel to the fire for why we should have this military industrial profit machine set up and going. A lot of people would say that's when the neoliberal capitalism took hold and is sticking around, which in English, it's just we're favoring companies over citizens.
Yeah. When it started
think-
to take off. And there was also a lot of offshoring that began then,
A lot
too.
of outsourcing and offshoring that began then. Yes, a lot
And
of
the pensions started going away. They started shifting
Yes.
to 401ks. Like, that's what's hard to pinpoint. I was trying to really find, but I just felt like it's the era. There's a weird, and I wasn't alive then. I haven't, read 100 books on what the hell was going on in every aspect of the 80s. But anytime you look at a problem, the fuse that was lit, for some reason, it was roughly in the 80s.
It seems that a lot started in there. You could look at the M2 money supplies growth. It's grown significantly since the 80s. You could look at the wealth gap since the 80s. I highly encourage anyone to look up the website. It's WTF Happened in 1971. That's famously when we detethered ourselves from Bretton Woods or the gold standard, August of 1971, the Nixon shock. But from 94, the petrodollar, mid-70s, the Fair Credit Act, a lot of deregulation, industrialization, a lot of things changed since the 70s and 80s. I'm curious. I don't even know how to frame this question. I think it's going to extend our podcast a little too long. But, I mean, is there one change that you think could be made today to detether us from that? Are we just sitting again in a running vehicle that is running off the cliff that we kind of have to sit in the car and wait for it to go off the cliff? Because I feel that's what a lot of people feel. Or is there something, whether it's Reaganomics, gold, private equity, corporations, printing since '08, COVID, whatever hand we want to point at, we need 17 fingers to point at everybody.
Yeah.
But like, what's the one thing we could do to right the ship?
And the tough thing, though, man, is of why this is hard to pinpoint is because it's also got to be realistic that it can actually happen. like something like saying like, oh, maybe getting back on the gold standard. Like, I don't think that would ever happen or would benefit us. Having them stop borrowing so much fucking money and stop printing money would be a great start. But because I know that they want inflation, that's unrealistic too, because they need inflation to make their debt load feel smaller. Like,
yep, and the big companies that lobby for the laws to get
yeah,
passed, the laws to get passed and inflate the money because they have assets.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm basically every idea I'm like, oh, this is good, but then I like debunk myself because I'm like, yeah, but this is the, I just wish honestly, and this, I guess this is maybe a cop out answer, but I just wish that there would be some leader that would step up and talk. Everything we're talking about, no one talks about on mainstream or in the politics. There's no education whatsoever. It's just narrative, propaganda, and telling people how to feel. And there needs to be more education. We need education as people to understand what our country needs to go through. And I think we're stuck around this idea of wanting to tax the rich. Needs to be looked into, but I think the whole thing needs rechanged. I don't want to go through my whole gross revenue tax again with you, but I just think simplifying things and getting ready for AI, because that's the one variable that scares me, but also gives me hope. Because our whole world's not going to look the same in 10 years. And I can't predict what that's going to do. So that's why I always encourage people, we need to keep fighting, having these conversations, vote everybody out, try to get somebody in there who's younger, who cares, who's in touch, who's not part of the fabric, but like outsiders who really care about the country over capitalism. And we got to work together and save money and pay off debt and just be secure, because there's going to be a time to pounce. And the more we're prepared for it, the better. But yeah, man, I'm sorry I had to jump around your question. I just don't know the one thing, man. That's something I'll have to ponder on. I think there's 17 holes in the dam, and plugging one of them, the dam still breaks. So I think we need a bunch of people getting together to plug all these holes all together and make changes that can make just the middle class people's lives better. Because if we don't, for all the people who are like, the complaining, we're bitching now. What do you think the 12-year-olds are going to do when they reach the age of trying to buy a house or rent or get a job when they're competing against AI? We're going to look back and think we had it good, actually, compared to the alphas, if we don't make a change.
Freddie, always fantastic talking with you. You bring so much value in such a condensed form, and I don't feel you danced around the answer at all. I feel we brought up quite a few things throughout this, and I tried to summarize it into 3 words: unity, community, and change. If we can actually unite around something, form a community around that, and have that community push for ground level change, is what it sounds like how we get lawmakers into their positions, what they're able to and not able to do, who they answer to. Because if we could draw it down to one thing, it seems like lawmakers answer more to money than they do to the people they represent. And it's not illegal. It's not called bribing. It's called lobbying. It's not called money trusts. It's called a super PAC. It's called, not what it is, bank-run cabal, whether international or national, that's orchestrating things. It's something that would have to get changed at the baseline level, because it seems like the very people who benefit from it help set the rules in their favor from the start. Yeah,
man. That's why, and I think we have to maybe figure out how maybe we can even start some sort of not an organization, but organizing, actual.
Freddy Smith for president, 2032, easy. I'll run as your HUD. I'll take Scott Turner's job. I'll do the HUD thing, housing and urban development. Get a vice president. Go get James Lee. Maybe Ian Carroll would sign up for something. I think you could get a good group of people. But will you imagine just a bunch of TikTok creators just taking up cabinet positions? I don't know if I want that.
The one thing, real quick, the one thing, though, that I think would be cool is if you actually did start a movement and you got a little bit of money behind it, where this entire movement was to get qualified Democrats, Republicans, and independents in all the states running for all the seats. And we all know in this coalition, here's the people. So everybody part of the group of this nucleus, wherever you live, we're voting.
So we try to bombard the House of Representatives and the Senate by taking it. Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying there.
You know, where we say like it's, and it could be both parties.
Here are the 100 people that we're going after getting into Congress. If they're being voted for in your area, go vote for them.
Yes.
Deal.
Yes. On both sides, but they're for the people over profits, not the other way around.
Which sounds like that person or those people would be essentially forming their own type of party of assimilated belief that maybe it wouldn't be red versus blue. Maybe we finally start looking at the green. But Freddie, we're going to do this more. We've already had 2 conversations on your podcast. I'm going to shout out you. Your TikTok is fantastic. Instagram the same. A lot of content that is receipt ready, that is completely backed information. Not a lot of opinion going on, which I think is very fresh in today's social media world. That's at Freddy Smith. And on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Freddy Smith Podcast. You've had everyone from people like James Lee and Ian Carroll. Ian Carroll, not he's going to be on there, but was it Tiffany that you had on there? Private equity expert, has an amazing story herself. You're touching on so many topics that are so pivotal. So I highly suggest anybody that wants to listen to you more, check out your podcast first. But otherwise, how can people best connect with you?
Yeah, through social. I mean, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and especially for my podcast, I'm trying to become more educated myself. So if you're interested in those conversations, I'm always trying to bring people on who are smarter than me, know more in depth than I do, so that we can both be learning together. So that's more of a learning long form. But my TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube shorts are more hit pieces with data. So it depends on what you're into. But yeah, you can check me out on all of those.
And as everybody should, because you're a worthwhile follow. You're a great person, great creator, and you're allowing, I love that you're openly allowing for people to watch you grow. I think there's way too many people that claim to be a subject matter expert from Go, and that's just not realistic or ever true. So thank you, everybody who's listening along to this. Freddie, always a pleasure. And as everybody knows, same fire, same fight next time. This has been episode 4 of the Zach Fast Podcast.